Hi, I'm Mr. Atkins. Hola, mi amigos. No, just kidding. Okay, let's see. Welcome to week 4 of distance learning. Don't know if you've been paying attention, but the governor of the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis, made a decision today that all public schools for the rest of the year would be done distance learning. That makes me sad because that means you and I will never be in class together again. So that's pretty sad because you guys are 8th graders, and that means you're not going to be coming back to Raw next year, which is exciting, right? For you, but that means I won't see you guys. So all that to say, if you didn't hear, there you go. And then hopefully you'll start high school in August. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this week. My plan is to do this stuff right here for the next 6 weeks or so until school is over. So we'll just keep doing our thing. We'll still have class. You can still call me and text and all that stuff, and we'll still get your grades going. Okay? You'll get out of raw. It'll be awesome. Now, let's get to this week. You should have downloaded this lesson plan PDF. Okay, and the first page gives you all the details. Monday the 20th to Friday the 24th week. It should say week 4, but it doesn't. I don't know why. I didn't change it. That makes me sad too. All right, so topic, the Jackson era. Andrew Jackson, that's who we're talking about. You need to be able to identify key ideas and influences of this guy, Andrew Jackson, on America. Why do people make such a big deal out of him? And then there's also this other thing. There's a conflict related to the Missouri Compromise that happens around this time as well. And so you don't even know what that is yet, but you should by the end of all this. Okay, so your resources for this week, this PDF that we're looking at here, all the notes and everything, the live Q&A sessions that I do Tuesday and Thursday from 3 p.m. to 3:30, and here's the link. Okay, if the link doesn't work, just open up the Zoom app and then type in this meeting ID and this password, and it'll let you in. And then my teaching videos on YouTube, which hopefully that's what you're watching right now. Here's the link for the channel. All right, the classwork for this week. Read through the notes, watch the video. So you should be doing both right now, hopefully, if you're doing it the right way. Jot some notes down, however you want. If you still have your notebook, I gave page numbers just so you can kind of keep it together. If there's any questions that I say out loud or I say on paper, pause the video and try to answer them. And then join me for the Q&A, especially if you have questions or you just want to ask me to explain something live, and you can ask questions. That's helpful. And then take the quiz. And that's how you get credit. Take the quiz and pass it. Get at least 60% or higher, which I think is 8 out of 13. Or if it's 14 questions, you got to get 9 questions right. I forget. And that's all you got to do. Just like for this last week. Take the quiz, don't fail it, and you get full credit for the week. There are bell work, homework, and classwork questions, definitions, and the live meetings, and those will help you pass the quiz. Some of you found out last week that the quiz is not as easy as you thought. So if you actually put a little bit of time into these things, at least by watching this video, those things will help you pass. You'll have 90 minutes to take the quiz, and if you need to retake it, just message me somehow, okay? So here's my email. Here's a phone number you can call or text. People's like, I'm not calling you. Right, text. And then show up to the Zooms, send me a message in Remind, send me a message in Teams, send me a message in Outlook, okay? And that is it. So let's move on to the notes. The Jackson era, all right? Here's your homework, right? I'm not grading it, but this is kind of what you need to focus on. Compare and contrast sectionalism and nationalism. Which thing is more prevalent in American culture today? So like in 2020, would we be more sectionalistic or more nationalistic? Number 2, what is the Monroe Doctrine and why did they make it? Why was it created? And number 3, explain this thing called the Missouri Compromise. Why was there even a need for a compromise? So let's go on it. Yep, got it. Hey, look, Andrew Jackson. He's on the $20 bill. You've seen this guy like most of your life. So We're talking about him. Why is he important enough to be on the $20 bill? 1800s. Oh, by the way, they're supposedly, and I don't know if this is still happening, but they're supposedly replacing Andrew Jackson with Harriet Tubman. Don't know if it's actually going to go down or not, but that's what they said. All right, here we go, 1800s. Thinking back to last week, what major event was taking place in the 1800s? That's right, the Industrial Revolution. Good job, mi amigos. Where did the Industrial Revolution begin? I didn't tell you last week because we didn't have time. Turns out, England. Yep. And then we stole it. So how did the Industrial Revolution start in America? In class, if we were doing this as a whole week instead of just one 45-minute video or whatever, I would tell you the story. We would talk about how this guy, last name Lowell, he went over to visit some factories over in England, and they were like super secretive. They're like, okay, we'll let you in because you know the owner, but you can't bring any notes. You can't bring any note paper or pencil or pen or anything like that. We won't let you write anything down while you're in here because we don't want you to steal our ideas and start doing what we're doing because we're making all the money. And little did they know that this guy had like a photographic memory. So all he had to do was look at something and he had it memorized, which is pretty crazy. So they give him the tour of the factories over in England, and then he comes back to America, Massachusetts, and he sets up an entire town built around factories. And it's a pretty crazy story. But anyway, that's the guy that got the factory life started here in America. But it has a bigger impact, and that's what we're going to focus on this week. All right, 1823, which is around the time period we're talking about. There were fewer than 10 million Americans. Now, that's pretty crazy. Today, there's 320 million. Back then, there were 10 million. All right, the majority of people lived in rural areas, like we said last week, near the East Coast. The largest city in New York had 120,000 people. That's smaller than Tallahassee right now. If you've ever gone to an FSU football game and the whole stadium was packed, that's 80,000 people. Right? So like New York City was just slightly bigger than Doak Campbell Stadium when it's full capacity. All right, Philadelphia and Baltimore were about half that size. Those are the next two largest cities. Boston was up there too. But anyway, okay, so think about that for a second. Cities aren't gigantic. Factories haven't really come along yet. So everybody's still rural, like we talked about last week. But like we talked about last week, people moved to the cities because they lost their jobs on the farms because everything was being replaced by machines. But now they had these factories to work in, so they all moved to the city because they could work in a factory there, and that's their new job, right? Well, we said all these people from different backgrounds were now living next to each other. Whereas before, all these different cultures were kept separate, and so their cultures start to mix over time, and we get this thing called American culture from these people living together in close quarters in cities, and their cultures mixing with the people next to them. And people started to kind of focus less on their individual differences and focus more on what they had in common. All right, so this is where we start talking about sectionalism versus nationalism. Back in the day, prior to this change, because of the Industrial Revolution, people were really very focused on the region that they came from. So if you met one of these people back in 1800 and you said, hello, where are you from? They would probably, and like you don't know this person, like you guys met on an airplane or something. Airplanes didn't exist. But if they did, you would say, hey, where are you from? They would say, oh, hello, I'm from Germantown in Pennsylvania. Oh, that's interesting. If they were in China and someone said, oh, where are you from? Imagine they both spoke the same language, right? Where are you from? The person would still say, I'm from Germantown, Pennsylvania. Now that's a weird answer because you and me today, if we go to China and they say, where are you from? Our first answer is probably going to be America. I'm from America, right? I mean, that's what I would say, especially for someone that's not also from America. Someone from some other countries like, oh, where are you from? Oh, America. I'm like, oh, where in America? Oh, that's when you start to get specific. You start to talk about what section of America. Oh, I'm from Florida. Oh, I've been to Florida. What part of Florida? Oh, Tallahassee. Really? I lived in Tallahassee for a year. What part of Tallahassee? And you'd be like, oh, I'm up by Lake Jackson or whatever. And then you'd start to get specific, but you wouldn't start off with that. You wouldn't travel to Brazil and they say, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Tharp Street. Like, most people don't do that. That'd be weird. Except some of those people that get tattoos on the inside of their lips where they're like, hey, wait, where they're like, Tharp Street. You wish I had something there right now. Tharp Street. I don't. Not yet. All right. So anyway, people started to become more nationalistic. They identified more with their country, United States of America, than they did with their region or their state or their little area. So to be sectionalistic is to really identify most with your smaller area, like a state or a city or a region, versus nationalism, where you would identify yourself first as an American. So as we see the Industrial Revolution happen, we see nationalism kind of replacing sectionalism. People becoming more proud to be an American, really. And so we see the government start to doing things to kind of reflect that as well. So be able to describe the difference between sectionalism and nationalism and give some examples like I just talked about, okay? Let's see. One of the things that kind of happens as well, because people are more nationalistic and people are more like, America, is this thing called the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, so we have this president, and this is the first time we've mentioned him, but his last name is Monroe, President Monroe. And you guys remember, hopefully, me talking about Haiti and Napoleon Bonaparte from France and how the Haitians had a revolution while France was too busy fighting over there and fighting Spain and anything like that. So Haiti was able to get their independence. And that was really cool because they were the only successful slave rebellion in history. Well, up and down Central America and up and down South America, places like Brazil and um, uh, uh, um, I can't think of any other place in South America right now. Peru, and let's see, the one that starts with a G. What's the one that starts with a G? Um, Guatemala, yeah, Guatemala, and places like that. And Mexico, well, maybe not Mexico yet, but anyway, a lot of those little countries down there were controlled by Spain or Portugal. A little bit France, but mostly Spain and Portugal, like we talked about, a long time ago. Spain had control of those areas and Portugal had control of others. Well, the same thing that happened with Haiti happened with those colonies, those Spanish colonies in South America and Central America, which is when Spain and Portugal weren't looking, they were too busy fighting France. Well, those Spanish colonies were like, well, dang, while Spain is busy fighting France and Napoleon Bonaparte, we're just going to declare independence, and just like America and Haiti did. And so they did. So we have all of a sudden around the early 1800s, all these brand new little countries right next to us. And we like that. We would much rather be neighbors with this brand new small country next to us than Spain or France, these giant countries. So this is good news for us because we are not going to get taken over by Guatemala, right? Because they're brand new. They don't really have much of an army at the time, and they're way smaller, and they're more likely to be friendly with us. So we want that. What we don't want is Spain. So here's the problem: the war between Spain and France is over, and Spain's like, wait, what'd you guys do? You declared independence? No, you didn't. And they're about to come back over to Central and South America and retake all their old land. And France is considering doing that too a little bit. But we're like, whoa. No, you can't do that. Spain, Portugal, you guys are gone. You lost it. They're declared independence. We are going to respect their declaring independence. And so the president at the time sees this as a chance for us to kind of be the powerhouse on our half of the world. And he puts out this letter kind of to all of the other countries in Europe and says, basically, we're dividing a line down the Atlantic Ocean. We will handle and protect all of this half of the world. It's ours. If you're from Europe, y'all protect y'all's half of the world over there. Hands off. So if we're protecting our half and you're protecting your half, there's no reason why European countries should be sending soldiers over here now. We're good, guys. We don't need your help. And what we really were doing was making sure that Spain and France and England and Portugal and all those countries felt nervous to come over here with troops, even down in South America, because we don't want their troops anywhere near us. Okay, so so they wanted to come back, but President Monroe and Congress at the time wanted to kind of stop them and kind of make them nervous, make them think twice before coming over. And the real reason is we were thinking, if Spain and all of them are out of the way, what if America expands all the way down? So we had this feeling that America, starting in Virginia, way back in the 1500s with Jamestown, that we would be spreading all the way down to the tip of South America. We would take the entire half of the world and all of it would be United States. That was the goal at the time. We might lay claim to those lands later. Let's keep Spain out of it. Let's keep Europe out of it. They might become United States. Guatemala might become United States at some point. And that's what we wanted. So President Monroe, it declared America off limits to European colonization. No more colonies could be created. And the idea was, well, why should anybody listen to us? Who cares? So America said it. So what? Well, why do you think some of these European countries would actually respect us now? Because if you think about it, they didn't used to. Why would they respect us all of a sudden? That's right. We've beaten England twice now. We just beat them in the War of 1812. We just beat them like 20, 30 years before that in the American Revolution. So they know that we have the ability to fight, that we are strong. We'll be fighting in our own territory. We'll probably have the help from all the colonies, all the new places like Guatemala and Peru and all those places down there. They would want America's help to keep Spain and Portugal and all those places out of there. So, yeah, that was great. Monroe Doctrine. All right, next. Now, this is unrelated. Wait, hold on. I got to pause this thing. I'm dying. Crisis averted. My battery was down on like 11%. Missouri Compromise. Now, this thing happens in 1820. Before I really tell you about it, let me give you an overview and where this is going, because over the next few weeks, we're going to try to talk more about this part right here. Okay. Yeah. All right. So when we are looking at this same problem that we're about to talk about with the Missouri Compromise, we're going to look at 3 different years. We're going to look at 1820, 1850, and 1860. Okay, so we're at 1820 now. That's what we're about to study today. And then it's going to be related to something we're going to talk about that's going to happen 30 years after this, 1850. And then another 10 years are going to go by and 1860 is going to happen. And I'll give you the spoiler alert. All 3 of these years are years where America almost fell apart. America almost stopped being America, as in specifically the United States part. The United States almost stopped being united at all 3 of these points in history. And that's kind of a big deal. And we don't really talk about it very much today, although actually technically we do, you just don't realize it. So all 3 of these things, all 3 of these years, 1820, 1850, 1860, you need to kind of have in your head as like little touchstones of, wow, America almost stopped being united in those times. And so, and I'll give you the other thing too. By the time we get to 1860, we start shooting each other, killing each other. So that's kind of a big deal. We're killing each other over whatever it is we're about to argue about in 1820. We end up shooting other Americans over it, like lots. So let me kind of give you the short version of this before we move on. So in 1820, we have a problem. And I'll go ahead and tell you the big problem is slavery. We have people in America who are pro-slavery. So that would be like this side, we'll say this side over here, pro-slavery. That means they're for it, right? And then we have people who are against it. And that's these people over here. All right. So it's an opinion situation, right? So people's opinions, right? That's what we're talking about. We have people that are for it and people that are against it, but we have all these people in the middle. And it seems like the people in the middle that haven't really picked a side, they are the biggest group. So what we say is most people in America in 1820 had not made like a very strong decision on if they really supported slavery or if they were really against it. They hadn't really made that decision so much. So, but we have a lot of people that did. Look, here's, I kind of drew it out. So we have a small group of the population that's against it, and they are hardcore against it. These are the people that we called abolitionists. They thought that slavery needed to just be destroyed everywhere right off the bat, no questions, no reason why any slavery should exist at all, just completely get rid of it, and they would do almost anything to see it gone. So those are like the hardcore, no slavery, and there you go. The other side, pro-slavery, exact same idea. Slavery is needed, is what they would believe. Slavery is necessary. We have to have it. Our whole country will fall apart if we don't. And so they were going to fight tooth and nail to keep it, do whatever it takes to keep slavery going. So we got these two groups, and those people have made their own minds up, but the people in the middle haven't not yet. So what we're about to talk about with the Missouri Compromise of 1820 is kind of the fight between these two ideas. And then I told you that in 1850, it's gonna happen again. So the idea is we're gonna come up with a solution for it here in 1820, and I'll go ahead and tell you that's the Missouri Compromise. We'll explain it in a minute. But then it's gonna last 30 years. It fixes the problem for 30 years, and that's it. In 1850, it happens again. The same arguments, the same problems. It happens in 1850. We thought we had a solution in 1820. We did not. In 1850, it's gonna happen again, but look at how I drew it. We have more people choosing sides. We got more people against it and more people for it. The people who haven't made up their minds, it's a smaller group. And we're able to somehow like fix it for 10 more years. And then 1860, the same problem pops up again with this issue of slavery, except this time, almost everybody in America has picked a side and feels extremely strongly about their side. And this is when we start killing each other, literally. Like we literally start killing other Americans. Americans are killing Americans. So it's a pretty crazy time in history from the 1820s to the 1860s. But let's back up. 1820, the Missouri Compromise. All right, so it all comes down to numbers. I need you to remember something. We have 3 branches of government. And the first branch of government listed in the Constitution is, that's right, Congress. And then the second is the president, and then the third is the Supreme Court. Well, let's focus on Congress. Here's Congress. Congress is split into 2 sections. It's bicameral. We talked about it in this class. Remember I showed you the cameras and everything? But anyway, bicameral, we got the Senate and the House of Reps. And what you should know, but you probably forgot, states get a certain number of votes in the House of Reps based on how big their population is. So if a bigger state has more people in it, right, that's why it's bigger, they get more votes in the House of Reps, and the small states get very small amounts of votes. So so that makes the big states happy. They like that they get to outnumber the small states. Well, the small states like the Senate, because in the Senate, every state gets the same number of votes, and you should remember the number. 2. So 2 votes per state in the Senate, and this is where the problems come in. In order to pass any law in America, and this is true even today, the idea has to make it through the House of Reps, and they have to approve it. And it also has to make it through the Senate, and they have to approve it. So the House of Reps, the big states can pass all sorts of laws if they get together, but it doesn't matter unless they can make the small states in the Senate happy. Okay, well, so that's the background here. So let's talk about the situation in 1820. Well, let's back up 1 year before that, 1819. There were 22 states in the United States at the time. We had started with 13. Now we got 22. Wow, we're growing. Oh, growing country. All right, so there's 22 states in 1819. Literally half, so I'm not going to do the math for you. Half the states, make sure you know the number though, are slave states. They allow slavery. People in all of those states, not all the people have slaves. In fact, it's like, I think I looked it up one time. It was like 18% of people in the South had slaves. That's a smaller number than I thought. So it seems like again, it's like it normally is, where the very wealthy are the ones that have the stuff. And that included slaves back then. You had to be wealthy really to own most of the slaves, right? But anyway, so we call most of those states, almost every single one, was in what we call the South, right? And I'll show you a map here soon. Actually, I'll show you a map now. Boom, there we go. So you can see free right up here in this bluish color, and you can see slave down here in gray on the map. If this is not working, the video is not working for some reason, and you're just listening, in the notes page, you can flip to the map and see that. Those are the slave states, those are the free states. Okay, so the North, free. The South, slave. All right. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. If we had time, we would talk about, well, why? Why did the North not use slaves? Are there just better people up there? And the South, are these just horrible people down here where we live? Not really. It's not like that at all. It all comes down to money. The way that people made money up north was factories and other stuff like that. Shipping, trades. They didn't have farms as much down there or up in the north because it's too cold, right? So they didn't have, there were some slaves situations around there, but the slavery primarily happened down here in the South because that's the good growing land. That's where you grew cotton and tobacco and things like that. And that's the big money making stuff, especially cotton, once Eli Whitney invented that cotton gin, like I talked about last week. So the South was the one that wanted to expand their farms into these big things called plantations so they can make more money. You don't need a plantation to make to make some money, but if you were trying to get rich, you need as much land as possible, fill it up with as much crops as possible, and harvest it as quickly as possible. Well, the only way you can do that is if you pay people a bunch of money to work for you, or you just have some people kidnapped to make them work for free. So that's the option they went with because it saved money. Yeah. So it really does all come down to money, which is crazy. It's messed up. That's my opinion. But anyway, in the Senate, if there's 11 slave states, oh man, I did the math for you. You were supposed to do the math yourself. Okay, 11 states are slave, 11 states are free. Well, if they're going to pass a law that says anything about slavery, like getting rid of slavery, like if the North got together and was like, we want to get rid of slavery. Well, they've only got 11 states. They'd have to convince one of the slave states to join in so they could pass that law. And they're not going to do it. And the slave states the same way. If they wanted to expand slavery, well, the 11 southern slave states could get together and vote yes, but they would still need one of the people from a northern state, a free state, to join in to allow slavery to expand. And that's not likely to happen. So right now they are perfectly balanced, slave states and free states, and neither one has the power. They both either do nothing or they have to work together. So this is keeping us from falling apart at this point. If one side were to get, the fear is this, and this may not have happened. The fear was this: if the South was afraid that if the North got control, they would ban slavery and the money-making machine in the South would stop. All right. The people in the North were afraid of if the South got control, the South could make slavery happen in every state, including up there where they didn't want slavery, right? So both sides are kind of afraid of what the other side would do if they got the power. But right now everything's balanced, so no problem. Except here's the thing. America, more than anything, wants to grow. We want to get bigger. Right now we're 22 states. We used to be 13. We want in 1819, we want to be 23 states. This new place, Missouri, there's rules to become a state. I don't know if you know this or not. You have to have a certain amount of people. You got to have a certain amount of land. You have to have your own government with a constitution, and then you have to approve the U.S. Constitution. You have to ratify it, and then Congress can vote to let you in or not. And that's how states become states even today. Like some people are saying Puerto Rico may go through that process and become state number 51. It may. A lot of people in Puerto Rico don't want to, but a lot of people in Puerto Rico do. So who knows? 51 states. Some people are saying the city of Washington, D.C., which is not in a state, that they might do the same thing as well. They might go through the requirements to become a state, and they would actually be a state instead of just a city. That would be weird. It could happen. It might. Missouri had done all those requirements. They had the state boundaries set. They had their own government. They had enough people living there to be a state. Like 2 people couldn't make a state, right? It was like 10,000 per this many miles or whatever it was. I forget. But anyway, they did it all. And now they go to Congress and say, all right, Congress, we did all the requirements. Can you let us be state number 23? And they were like, yeah. But the problem is, if we let you in a state number 23, that upsets the balance between the slave states and the free states. Which one are you guys going to be? Are you guys going to be a slave state or a free state? Well, Missouri didn't really have a plan for that. And neither did Congress. So it says here, this exact balance between slave states and free states gave them both equal representation in the Senate. But if Missouri were admitted as a slave state, which I think they wanted to be, some people in Missouri wanted to be, then that balance would be upset. There would be 12 slave states, 11 free states. The slave states would be able to pass pro-slavery laws, and that is going to be a problem for the North. And so a lot of people were like, if that happens, we need to break away and start our own country. We can't do it. We're not going to be in a country with pro-slavery happening everywhere. We live up north because we want to be away from it. That's what a lot of the abolitionists said, the hardcore people on that blue side. And so they said, okay, well, what if they come in as a free state? And then the Southern people freaked out. They were like, no, we can't let them come in as a free state. That would destroy slavery. We wouldn't make any money. You know, that whole thing we talked about earlier. So they had to come up with some type of solution. So what they did is they compromised. Compromise is where you work out a deal. Neither of you are really getting everything you want, but hopefully you both get something that you want. You work out a solution. We almost fell apart. We almost stopped being a country over this situation right here, over Missouri just asking, hey, I followed the rules, can I be a state? And we were like, ugh. So here's what we did. We came up with the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and the short version is we just kind of found a way to ignore the problem. We found a way to kind of just not deal with it for now. And that's kind of what a lot of times we do in our personal lives. We know there's a problem, but we're going to put it off and not deal with it. And then just like what happened here, it's going to get worse. It might work for a while, and then it's going to get worse. And then it's going to maybe last for a little bit longer, and then it's going to get worse. And then eventually you won't be able to ignore the problem. Life lessons for free. Okay, so here was the agreement. The agreement says, yeah, we'll let Missouri in, and Missouri will be a slave state as long as at the exact same time we have another state come in and be state number 24. And they have to be a free state. So what they did was they took part of Massachusetts. I don't know if you remember, but a long time ago, I showed you a map. Actually, it's in your notebook if you back up. Well, maybe it's not. But anyway, it showed that like Massachusetts was here, but it also was up here. It was like 2 parts of Massachusetts. And I was like, you guys will learn about why it's Maine now, but it was part of Massachusetts. Well, this is why. They said Missouri is going to come in as a slave state. That's the 12th slave state. Well, we got to give the free states a new state as well. So we will take this part of Massachusetts, split it up, and make it its own state, call it Maine. It fits the requirements. We let them in at the same time. And instead of being 11 to 11, now it's going to be 12 to 12. We keep the balance. So it's not a real good solution because it doesn't really fix the problem. What, are we only ever going to let 2 states in at a time? We can never let just a single state in because it'll upset the balance. It's not a good solution. It's ignoring the problem, but that's what they did. It was either that or, find a real solution, or I don't know. People didn't really see other options. And I don't either. It's a difficult situation. I mean, I do get rid of slavery, but again, that's my opinion, right? So they also made this other part, which is really dumb. They drew a line on the map, and look, I'll go back to it. Nope, there it is. They drew this line right here. They pulled out a map. Whenever someone pulls out a map and just draws a line on it, they're probably not doing a good thing. So they just pulled out a map, and there is a line right here. This line, and if you can see my mouse, it's right under Virginia and Kentucky, Missouri, right above Arkansas, and it's labeled here the 3630 line. Latitude and longitude on a map, like you hopefully learned in 6th grade, 3630 is the latitude longitude marker. That would be latitude, right? Because it's going up. Anyway, so this latitude line right here, they drew a line on this map, and it goes all the way over here to California. Well, it's not California yet, but someday it's going to be. And when they passed this Missouri Compromise of 1820, they said, all right, here's how we fix the problem. And everybody agreed to it. They said, from here on out, after Missouri and Maine, we will draw this line, and it'll just keep going across the undone parts of the map over here. And after we do that, here, let's see if I can draw it. Pin. Oh, yeah. Yeah, beautiful drawing skills. All right, they said this line right here, any state that comes in now, if it's above this line, it's going to automatically be a free state, no matter what. Even if they want to be a slave state, can't do it. So all of this over here, I got a pin now, are going to be free states no matter what. All this down here, if it ever becomes a state below the line, automatically a slave state, even if they don't want it. That's the goal. That's the rule. The problem is, hopefully you already see it. How do I delete this? Reset? Yeah. No? I don't know how to delete this. Well, that's a problem. Oh, well. Well, now I just drew on my map. Anyway, okay, so here's the problem. You and I know that other states come in later, like California. I'll try to draw it in a different color. Pen color. Blue. All right. So California is going to come in like this. And the problem is that 3630 line is going to go right through the middle of California. So what are we going to do? Make half a California slave and half a California free? That doesn't really make sense. That's like being half hungry and half not. I mean, I guess, yeah, that kind of makes sense. That's a bad analogy. It's kind of like being, I can't use that analogy. It's kind of like saying half your body has corona and the other half doesn't. Well, that's dumb. Like you either have it or you don't, right? So, so anyway, that's kind of the situation. We can't have like a state just being half of one or the other. So they basically made a dumb rule, and it's going to come back to bite them later. Instead of dealing with the problem, that's what they did. Got to deal with problems, y'all. All right, next. So that's Missouri Compromise. All right, next. We're talking about actual Andrew Jackson for once. He's the whole focus here. All right, so after the Missouri Compromise, after that 3630 line, bad idea. Oh, hey, my pin's gone. Oh, that's nice. Anyway, here's some questions you can pause the video and answer. You really should. Which path led to Andrew Jackson's presidency? Like, how did he get there? Be able to tell like all the things that happened before he got to be actually president. Next, how did the Indian Removal Act lead to the thing called the Trail of Tears? All right. How did a conflict over the issue of states' rights, the states' rights to have slavery, lead to a crisis? All right. So that one's kind of what we just talked about. So that be able to explain the Missouri Compromise and the conflict between the northern and the southern states over should states be allowed to have slaves or not. All right. How did it lead to a crisis? All right. So there we go. Let's move on. First, election time. Yay. It's been a while since we talked about an election. Here's the election of 1824. This guy, Andrew Jackson, is running. He's very popular. And it shows us up here, look, the electoral vote and the popular vote. So remember, if you remember from civics, whenever we vote for president, all the people vote. And then this thing called the Electoral College takes the people's votes and decides, okay, you get this many, you get this many, and they kind of space it out based on what the people voted. And so if you win a big state, like back then Virginia was a big state, you won Virginia, wow, you got 24 votes, all 24 electoral votes all for you. That's excellent. If you got South Carolina, man, you got 11 votes all to yourself. And so the idea is win as many states as you can and get all their electoral votes. And to win president, you got to get past the 50% mark on the electoral votes. Whatever it is, whoever gets more than half of the electoral votes, even today, that's the president. All right, and that's how we have it where Hillary Clinton won this election in 2016, popular vote, but she didn't win it in the right places. Donald Trump did. He won the states that added up to him getting more than half of the electoral votes. Weird situation, but it happens. Well, 1824, was an even weirder situation. Okay. We have, and I'm sure you can see, 4 people running for president. And all of them got a pretty big chunk of the vote. Look up here at the electorals. Well, no, let's figure out who the winner is. The clear popular person, obviously, Jackson in this greeny color, right? He gets 38% of the electoral vote. He gets 43% of the popular vote. And who's second place, or who's up here? Pink. Yeah, pink. John Quincy Adams, related to John Adams from back in the day. All right, but anyway, he gets 31% of the popular vote and 32% of the electoral vote. Well, he's clearly second place. And then these other guys both get like 14, 15%. Not great, but I mean, it's better than you. Ooh. So anyway, Jackson's the clear winner, but the problem is, look at his electoral count. He only got 38%. You got to get above 50. He didn't. In fact, nobody did. And this is why it's weird. If nobody, there's this weird rule in the Constitution, and actually it's not weird, it's a good rule. If nobody gets 50% of the electoral votes, then we don't have a winner. That's not enough, right? What if 20 people run and everybody only gets 5 or 6%? Man, only 6% want you to be president, but you win because you had more than other people? That doesn't make sense. So what they do is, if we ever have a situation like this, the House of Representatives gets to pick. And that's just how it works. And that's a weird situation, but they basically are the tiebreaker, except it's not really even a tiebreaker. It's just basically like, who do they want now? Now that it's in their house, whoever the House of Reps votes on, that's who they got. So the election of 1824, it's very clear that Andrew Jackson was the winner, but John Quincy Adams becomes president. I know, it's weird, but people in the House of Reps thought Quincy Adams would be a better president than Jackson. They didn't really like Jackson. If you remember back to when we talked about political parties, you know why. You know how people described him and why the donkey is associated with him and his party. So anyway, John Quincy Adams wins even though he loses. Ain't it like that sometimes? Anyway, let's fast forward. 1828. The people who supported Jackson are furious. Obviously, they're mad. They're like, okay, Quincy Adams, you got it for 4 years, but just wait till what happens in 1828. We're not going to let it happen twice. And that's right, they don't. So let's get to that. Okay, so Andrew Jackson, let's back up. Why was he so popular? And we already know, because we've talked about this guy a couple times already. He served in the Army during the Revolutionary War. He was really young. I think if I remember right, he was like 16 when he fought against the British under George Washington. He was really young. He was a little kid, basically. He was just like a year or two older than you, and he was fighting in the Revolutionary War. Now, he didn't do much, but that's some street cred right there. In 1820s, to be able to say, I fought in the Revolution. Yeah, okay, wow, you're like a living hero. He was a lawyer in Tennessee, a good one too, a popular one anyway. He bought land, so he had kind of made some money for himself. Y'all, and not only that, he grew up like dirt poor. Like literally his floor was dirt in his house when he grew up. That's what they mean, dirt poor. So he had nothing, and then by the time he's an adult, he has built himself up into this wealthy man, and no one gave it to him. He just made it, and so that's kind of respectable, right? He's served in a variety of government offices. He was a House rep. He was a senator for his state. At one point, this isn't in the notes, but he actually was, when Florida was still a territory, he was the governor of Florida here. He served in the War of 1812, and he got the nickname Old Hickory because hickory trees are super strong and they don't fall down. So he's got some respect from troops and veterans. If you remember, he became the hero of New Orleans. He fired behind those bales of cotton against the British and kept them out of New Orleans at the end of War of 1812. And like, people are like, he's smart, he's a good fighter, he's a self-made man, he knows what it's like to be poor, right? Because he grew up poor, he knows what it's like. So anyway, and he used all that to run for president, and then he wins, but he loses. Crazy story. 4 years later, oh, way different. First off, you should notice the very first thing that is different right down here. How many names? That's right, 2. Only two. All those other people that ran for president, no, people were like, you get out of there. We just want it to be between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. And who is going to win? Obviously Jackson, right? 56% of the popular vote, 68% of the electoral vote. Look at Quincy Adams. Only 44% of the popular vote, only 32%. And look where all of Quincy Adams's people are. Up north, Massachusetts, right? Because that's where his family's from, and all those places around Massachusetts. Half of New York, right? But down here, where all these people live, they were all about Andrew Jackson. Now think about that for just a second. What could be different between the people up here in Boston and New York and all these cities up here and these people who live down here and all these other places? Well, back then, most of the big cities in America were all on the coast and up north, right? All the people that lived out here in this yellow area, most of them were like still rural workers who were not wealthy. There weren't a bunch of giant cities out there where people were really rich all over the place, right? So they identified with Andrew Jackson more than they did with John Quincy Adams. So Andrew Jackson becomes president in a landslide. There's something else too that you need to know. Andrew Jackson, let's see what it says here. Yeah. Jackson and his supporters create a new political party that became the Democratic Party. So the one we call Democratic today, this is how it started. Adams and his supporters started their own party and they called themselves the National Republicans. Yeah. People thought, Adams, you don't understand us. Jackson, you do understand us. You're a man of the people. And here's the other thing too. In 1820s, voting restrictions in states had changed. You used to have to own land to vote, right? So the only person who could own land or who could vote was the person in your family that owned land. If it was grandpa, he was the only one that could vote. Not your dad, not your uncles, only grandpa or whatever. But a lot of states had passed laws that changed that. So now people who were poor, because they didn't own land, they just rent or whatever, now they can vote. And guess who they're going to pick? They're going to pick Jackson. And that's why Jackson has so much of the popular vote and wins. Poor people finally became voters and they vote for the person most like them. So the election of 1828, ordinary working Americans who weren't wealthy were strong Jackson supporters, and Jacksonian democracy is what we call that. When the idea, and it's kind of a nice idea, that normal, regular people who don't really have a lot can still change the country by getting somebody elected who they want. And that concept is Jacksonian democracy, part of it anyway. There also was this thing called a spoil system that Andrew Jackson knew how to play the game. And one of the games he played was, oh, I'm a man of the people. Look, I was raised dirt poor. Man, he used that. But the other thing was the spoils system. If you support me, if you help me get elected in your state, I'm going to make sure when I'm president, I'll give you a job in my government. I'll make you secretary of something, or I'll make you this of this, or I'll put you in charge of blah, blah, blah. And then once he got in office, he did. He gave people who helped him jobs. And that was common. Other people did that too, but he really did it. And so people were like, oh, I might not like this guy all the way, but if he's going to give me a job and I'm going to be rich or whatever, yeah, I'm going to follow him. So anyway, and then there's always this story. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but on the day that he was inaugurated as president, it started off all formal and official. And then apparently by the end of the day, it ended like this. And you can see Andrew Jackson over here in the corner, and what are all these people doing? Just look at the rabble running around inside the White House. Apparently someone even literally swang from a chandelier. There were very many adult beverages consumed inside the White House that day. And people were just like falling over. Look at these two guys down here just having a random conversation with a bum. I don't know what's happening here. But Andrew Jackson really did. He was like, I'm a man of the people. So when I'm president, I'm going to open up the White House and everybody just come on down and have a party. And they did. Pretty crazy. Couldn't do that today, that's for sure. You get shot if you touch the fence. Maybe not shot, but they'll arrest you, tackle you. All right, let's talk about what happens when Jackson is president. The Indian Removal Act is probably the thing that he's most known for, other than getting elected. There's a bunch of other things too, but this is kind of the big deal. All right, so the Indian Removal Act. There were 5 Native American groups that people, white Americans, called these 5 groups the 5 civilized tribes, because a lot of them had started to try to like make the, you know, like the Cherokee, it says it up here, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, the actual tribe, not the football team, and the Creek. These are all Native American groups, nations that lived here before anybody else got here, right? So we called these the civilized tribes because they knew that we were kind of in charge. So they learned English, and they would dress in American style clothes and do stuff like that. They'd adopted part of our culture just to make it easier for them to kind of live here. And so anyway, even though they can speak English and all that stuff, many white Americans still viewed them as inferior. Oh, they're just cavemen pretending, is kind of the idea. Now, it says here in the notes, farmland was becoming scarce in the East. And I wrote that. It's not really true, though. Farmland wasn't becoming scarce, but we felt like it was. Oh, no, we're running out of land. Look at those Indians' land over there. They got a ton. What if we just took it? Oh, but we can't. They live there. Not for long. So the Indian Removal Act was basically a way to get the Indians off the land so we could just take it for ourselves. There literally is no other reason. We wanted it. They had it. Let's kick them out because we can. That's literally what we did. So the Indian Removal Act of 1830, while Andrew Jackson was president, he signed it into law. Congress passed it, but he signed it. It said we're going to relocate. That's a nicer word than kick out. Relocate those 5 nations to an area west of the Mississippi River, call it Indian Territory. Today we call it Oklahoma. All right, if you look to the last page of your notes, you can see a map there of where it is. But basically they were going to take all these tribes that were spread out all over the states and just kind of scrunch them down into this one little tiny area called Oklahoma. Why Oklahoma? Why would they put them in Oklahoma? It's simple. The parts that they put them in, there's like no good farmland. We couldn't use it for anything. Well, give that to them. Let them have that. That's the bad land. We don't need that. Just give it to them. Yeah, it's okay, but it's not great. Let's let the Indians live there. So that's what we did. We took their nice, rich land because we wanted it, because it was good for stuff, and we traded them and forced them to trade not good stuff. So the U.S. Army went and literally rounded up the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Chickasaw, those 3, and marched them west hundreds of miles to Indian Territory. And on the way, they didn't really give them a lot of time to prepare, and they didn't really care about the weather. And on the way, they died due to being too cold, being out in the rain. They didn't have food. There were diseases spreading among groups of people that were having to stay together. So they should have been social distancing, but they weren't allowed. And so sick people made other people sick, and it just spread. And people were already sick from being hungry and being out in the cold and the sun and all that stuff. So lots of people died, mostly children and old people. So just to get some land, we killed a bunch of old people and some children. They didn't do anything to deserve it, and just that's what happened. So those 3, that's what happened to them. Now, what about the Cherokee and the Seminole? All right, so my thought is, and when we hear about stories like this, we're like, why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they try? Well, they did, and they lost. The Cherokee tried a different thing, though. All right, let's see. Oh, wait, let's talk about the Seminole first, since that's what's next on the notes. All right, the Seminoles, they did fight back. All right, so here's the thing. They had the advantage of being down here in the Florida swamps. The women and children hid from the soldiers in the swamps. They couldn't round them up because the soldiers couldn't get into the swamps. They didn't know how that worked, and they were getting eaten by alligators and all sorts of stuff like that, legit. And while the troops were looking for the women and the children in encampments, the Seminole men were kind of following them around secretly and would do hit and run attacks on the American soldiers until the American soldiers just gave up. They were able to get about 3,000 Seminole, and that's it, and forced them to move to Indian Territory. But the rest stayed in the swamps and stayed there, and they still live in Florida today. If you ever go down to Doak Campbell Stadium, again, there's this statue, and we get made fun of at FSU for it a lot because it says unconquered. And people are like, man, your football team loses all the time. How are you unconquered? It's not talking about football. It's talking about the actual Seminole tribe. How America was never able to remove them from their homeland completely. They're still living there in 2020 right now. causing problems for the governor sometimes because they're stubborn and he can't do much about it. But anyway, yep, that's how it goes. They are unconquered. They never got fully removed from Florida. All right, so that's the Seminole. Now let's talk about the Cherokee and the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee are like, we're not going to fight. We're going to try to do this the American way. We're going to go to court. So the Cherokee sue the government in court and say, you can't take our land. They fought the removal in the court system. They sued the federal government, claiming that they had a right to be respected as a foreign country. They're like, you should treat us the same as you would treat a foreign country, and you can't just take a foreign country's land. Well, you're not supposed to anyway. The Supreme Court ruled against the Cherokee. The Supreme Court was like, la, 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 we can't hear you because you're not Americans. We won't even listen to your case. So the Supreme Court, even though they might have agreed with the Cherokee, their ruling was you can't use the court system because you're not American, even though they were here first. They were here before anybody else who calls themselves American. And the Supreme Court was like, y'all aren't American enough to use the court system. Even though they were born here, lived here for thousands of years. So that's the way it happens. Well, good news. Why didn't anybody help them? Some people tried. So there was this guy who lived in Cherokee land, Samuel Worchester. Now, he was a white guy, and he was a friend of the Cherokee, and the Cherokee had an understanding and they allowed him to live in their area. So the state of Georgia went to go round him up, and he was like, you can't make me leave. And they were like, well, you're on Indian land. He's like, yeah, but I'm a white guy, so I'm an American citizen. I can sue in court. So Worcester, this guy, sues in court for the Cherokee, and is like, hey, listen, I live with the Cherokee, and you can't remove us. And you have to listen to me because I am an American citizen and I'm white. So you got to listen to me. And he wins. Worcester versus Georgia, 1832. The Supreme Court rules against Georgia, saying the state can't make the Cherokee take a hike and leave. And that's great. Like the system kind of worked there. But the Cherokee still ended up getting kicked out. How? Well, number one, they knew that where the Cherokee lived, especially up in the mountains of Georgia, there was a ton of gold. Gold in them there hills. So they were like, we want it. So what the government did, they went to the Cherokee and kind of secretly, and they would kind of single out people in the tribe and say, hey, psst, hey, come here. Hey, will you sign a deal with us and say that you are a leader and that you give us the land and we'll pay you for it. We'll pay you, just you, and we'll protect your family if you will sign this agreement and say that you're one of the leaders of the Cherokee. And they did this over and over again until they found 3 or 4 people who were willing to basically sell out their own people for some money. And so that's what they did. And so once the state of Georgia gets some signatures from people that they said were leaders of the Cherokee, even though they weren't, they took that to the court and said, hey, court, we got the leaders to agree to leave. And the court says, okay, remove them all. And the rest of the Cherokee were like, no, we didn't do that. These guys don't count. They're not real leaders. But the court didn't care. They had a signed piece of paper, and so we kicked them out anyway. To get around the court's ruling, government officials signed a treaty with 500 Cherokee leaders who favored relocation. Okay, it's more than a couple, but it's definitely a small amount compared to the real thing. Plus, the majority of the Cherokee did not want to leave, but these 500 were getting paid off. Anyway, this is where things get bad. The Cherokee were herded by the U.S. Army in a long and deadly march west, just like the others, but here's the problem. The time all this court stuff had delayed it to where now they were leaving in like the middle of winter. Well, this is going to be more death. All right. So of the 18,000 Cherokee forced to leave their homes, 4,500 died on the march. That's crazy. That's like 1 in 4. So imagine a family of 4. Okay, one of those people is going to be dead by the end of this trip. Every family out there, every family going on a trip, a 1 in 4. If every family lost 1 out of 4 people, that's what this was like for the Cherokee. And they all died from the same stuff, but it being cold, freezing to death, diseases spreading, not having enough food. And that's how it goes. And they had a name for it in Cherokee. I don't actually know the language, but when you translate it, it translates it to the trail where they cried, the Trail of Tears. And that's like the famous name for it, the Trail of Tears. And so they all kind of say, we even won, but we still lost. And that's kind of the story of the Cherokee there. And they were forced to go, and they didn't have any way to stop it. It was either that or just go ahead and fight a war and die. And so they said, well, at least some of us will be saved if we just do what they tell us to. So that's what they did. And so our U.S. Army soldiers marched them out there. It was crazy. So I got some like political cartoons here. I got some drawings. Look, you can see this. They're using this threat of war, breaking the peace on the ground to kick them out. This person painted this based on stories that he looked up. It's kind of crazy. You can picture the trail here. You can see the Army soldiers on their horses with guns and stuff. You can see people over here burying bodies. Yeah, pretty crazy. You can see there's no leaves on the trees. It's freezing. Here's another one painted by somebody else. Same idea. Soldiers over here with guns, leading these people. Why didn't they fight back? Because if they tried, all the people would die. It'd be a war. Just really long, bad trek here. This is an interesting picture. Look at this trail of people in the back. All right, and then look, this mom, well, we assume it's a mom, right? Holding a baby. You can see the hair, but really it's a skull. But look at all these faces. These are Andrew Jackson faces. Isn't that crazy? So this artist is trying to make a statement here. What's hiding behind Andrew Jackson's face? Well, this artist says it's death. Well, that's interesting. And I think this part is interesting too. She's holding a baby, right? And the baby's holding this little packet right here, a packet of seeds. It says Jackson Indian Remedy. And it's this child, this little white girl, standing next to a nice growing, looks like a tobacco plant. And everything's all sunshiny and happy. And this little baby, who's Cherokee, is looking at this. And everything's dark and night here, but it's all bright and sunny over here. Yeah, anyway, pretty interesting picture. There's something from a movie where they faked what it looked like. Yep, there's more of that. More of that. This sculpture is pretty crazy. I like it. All right, here's that map I was talking about. And this is it. You can kind of see where all the groups came from. We got the Cherokee up here in North Georgia. We got the Creek over here in Alabama. We got the Chickasaw up in North Mississippi and the Choctaw in Middle Mississippi. Seminole down here in Central Florida. And you can see they kind of took the Seminole by boat, the ones that they could find. The Cherokee, not only was it a bad time to travel, they made them kind of go up through the mountains, colder area to get there. And all the others kind of went this way. And then they all ended up over here in what they called Indian Territory. And that is what we call Oklahoma today. Pretty crazy. My family is actually, my mom's side, they're from Oklahoma, and there's Cherokee up there in that family tree. It's like my great-great-grandmother was Cherokee, 100%. So I don't know if she was brought over because she probably was born after that. But maybe her mom was. So that's pretty crazy. But that is it. That's Andrew Jackson. All right. If you need to watch any part of this again, pause it, skip it, watch it at 1.5 speed. Watch it at half speed so I talk like this. Or don't. But anyway, go take your quiz on Edmodo. Get at least 60% of the questions correct. And if you do that, you get full credit for the week. Show up to the Zoom if you have questions, if none of this made sense, or if you have anything else you need. And if you haven't done last week's quiz yet, go back and do it because it is for a grade. You're going to have to do it. All right. All right. Okay. Bye-bye.